I'm here with Darshan, and we're here with Legal Shark Week. Darshan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? And by the way, thanks for doing this for the group. We really appreciate it.
Always happy to. Thank you again for having me, Josh. I appreciate it. My name is Darshan Kulkarni. I'm an attorney. I'm a pharmacist. I'm based in Pennsylvania. I'm based near Philadelphia, actually, which luckily we seem to be having a nice day today, which has been unusual because it's been a mixture of really dull and drab or incredibly overheated. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm part of the mastermind group that Josh has organized, and there was this whole conversation around just there are all these legal questions that are floating around. Everyone seems to have their own little thing that they wanted to do. And Josh reached out and he's like, well, could you talk a little bit? And I was excited because it's to me, these mastermind groups are all about giving back and forth and giving assistance. So I'm excited to be part of that group. I'm excited to provide more information. So thank you for having me, Josh.
You're very welcome. I'm definitely excited to have you and have this conversation with you. So let's maybe just jump into it. I got a few questions that were posted by members in the group, but let's maybe talk about some of the state board issues that you're seeing. I know that's a concern for, some of our members and also other stuff. So maybe like three really important topics I think that I got from the questions answered are like state pharmacy board issues, like what are you seeing in the PBM world, and then, any HIPAA compliant issues there. So I'll go ahead and let you take it over.
Okay, so I'll take the first one. And again, feel free to ask questions. We'll jump in. We'll have some back and forths. And if people want to ask questions, feel free to message via Facebook or via Twitter or via YouTube. We should be able to get those messages as well. So one of the big things I'm seeing around the issue of state boards is you're seeing patients and you're seeing physicians, you're seeing healthcare practitioners getting upset with pharmacists because you're seeing a mixture of things like billing for services not rendered, billing for one thing but dispensing another product. These issues are popping up more and more, and what's happening is that pharmacies are being squeezed. And since pharmacies are being squeezed, they're trying to figure out how to get the last dollar. And what they're doing is they're taking shortcuts which may come back to bite them. So what's happening is you're seeing state boards go in and start auditing pharmacies. And once the state board comes in, now you're in trouble. The only question is, how bad is the damage going to be? I've been involved in situations like you start off with a PSAO audit, and the PSAO finds something, and they inform the PBM, and then the PBM finds something. They inform the healthcare practitioner. Well, in that specific instance was slightly different, but the PBM informs the state board informs the DOJ, and it just becomes this cascade of issues, and you're fighting from all sides. You may have one PSAO, but you may have multiple PBMs as a result of that PSAO, and the result of that is going to be you're now fighting individual PBMs. You're losing PSAOs who are your bread and butter. They're the lifeblood of your pharmacy. And now you're going, how do I fix this? Because you internally have to be fixing your processes as well. So it's really important to start thinking about how you're going to avoid these problems and sort of work in a way that addresses these needs. Think about the fact that, yes, it does make sense that you want that extra dollar because you're being squeezed on all these sides, but is it worth it in the end? If you've already done it, how are you going to fix it before it becomes a problem? Are you going to, for example, do a self-disclosure to the Department of Justice? And you'd go, why would I ever sit and self-disclose? Well, the truth is, if you don't self-disclose, you may be looking at criminal penalties. You may be looking at losing your license. You may be looking at the inability to actually bill anything because they may just ban you from Medicare and Medicaid. So it's not just you can't be a pharmacist anymore. You can't work in healthcare anymore. And that just shuts you down. State boards could take away your license. State boards could take away your pharmacy license. That impacts what you can do. The PSAOs and PBMs, if they terminate your contracts, you might now be in a situation with PBMs where you're looking at fraud. If you're dealing with PSAOs, and one PSAO finds out that you've had this problem, another PSAO may not pick you up. So all of those are feeding into it, becomes a feeding frenzy, and that becomes really, really difficult to manage. And at that point, all you're doing is trying to limit the damage as opposed to fixing problems before they become real issues. So I strongly advocate for pharmacists to try to avoid these problems, and hopefully they reach out to me before they become real problems and not after they've already been found out. Some conversations I've had have suggested that they don't see these as real problems. They see themselves as sort of defending against the onslaught of pharmacy, of PBMs and pharmacies that may be centrally located, and they're just this is their way to survive. And unfortunately, fraud is not an appropriate or a acceptable way to do that. I mean, a really good thing to look at is sort of what the DOJ sees as well. I'll start actually by looking at this video right here, and I'm going to share it. And it's what are the top 10 healthcare fraud issues for 20. I think this is 20. Yeah, this is 2021. So December 2021. So this is as of last year. Telemedicine was a $748 million fraud scheme. And I know that you had a similar one actually this year. Pharmacist and marketer pled guilty to $180 million healthcare fraud scheme. So again, you mentioned, for example, this area of marketing, rife with issues. Things like copay waivers, rife with issues. You have to be careful about these issues. And we had a conversation about, well, is this really a big deal? Well, it comes back to bite you, right? Because you've now got a situation where you are dealing with this idea that your marketer's going out there, they're doing what they can. They might sort of say, create like a kickback, and they might say something like, and I don't know, I wasn't reading this specific one as I said it, but you might be in a situation where you say, I'm a marketer, I represent this pharmacy. If you, Dr. X, come out and prescribe drugs, I'm going to be really, really happy, and maybe you buy two, I give one free kind of situation. That comes back to bite you. And you see that with pharmaceutical companies all the time, and that's hugely problematic as well. You also deal with, oh, you know what? I have these patients. I don't want to lose these patients over simple things like copays. What I'll just do is I won't accept the copays, or I won't chase them for the copays. Well, could come back to bite you. Turns out copay waivers are not acceptable because that's how third-party payers control their costs. So if you waive the copays, there's no incentive for the patient to try to control their costs. So that becomes hugely problematic, comes back to bite you. You might be in a situation where you, during COVID, and this was especially rife during COVID, you were doing prescription delivery, which is great. People didn't want to connect with you, which is great because they were trying to sort of distance themselves. Well, how did you ensure that you got a signature? Did you have some kind of signature log to demonstrate that that you actually delivered the medication? And if you didn't, then you might be in trouble. And these are some of those things that you want to be aware of. Another one is CEO gets, well, we know that opioids, for example, have been in trouble for a whole time. Hospice, home healthcare, again, area of issues. Fraudulent claims to TRICARE. These were 3 compounding pharmacy owners. As you can tell, these are not small cases. These are, in this case, this was a $126 million case in this one instance. $100 million for diagnostic labs. Now, in the mastermind group, you may have seen people talking about diagnostic labs. I'm all in favor of having new ways to open up labs, to open up insurance companies, to do different things. But if you do them, recognize that there are these risks, and you need to have a way of covering those risks. And this is we're just looking at a few of them. Like this was the top 5, I'm guessing. So this is just from last year. And I pulled up a random article right before we started to pull it up. The other thing you might want to start considering are what are the top 10 healthcare provider issues that DOJ and the like are looking at to say, we have concerns. These are the top 10 issues from the 2013 fraud manual. Billing for services not rendered. So now again, when we say services, we're also going to include products. Billing for products not provided. Billing for a non-covered service or a covered service as a covered service. So you're giving, and I'm going to do the equivalent for pharmacies. Billing for a service and saying, billing for, say, drug X and dispensing the generic of drug X. So billing for the brand, dispensing the generic. Seen that. Misrepresenting dates of service. So this might be, patient's going away, I'm going to just give one product away, or I'll bill for it later on. This might come back to bite you. Misrepresenting locations of services. You have 2 pharmacy locations. You're giving the product at one location, dispensing from another, or billing from another. Misrepresenting the provider of services. There was a conversation that came up, Josh, about having CMS systems out there and how you can open up essentially this product, this system right here, the 855B enrollment application, and what that could look like. And that might be another area. There are ways to actually completely mess that up, but turns out that there are ways you can do this right. For example, the question we looked at in the question that was proposed, in the scenario that was proposed, the question was, can pharmacies even qualify under an 855B application? And turns out they can. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So I'm going to show that to you so that we know that I'm not making this up. Hold on.
Yeah, I know the question was posed if they can create a clinical name and not mention the pharmacy in the title and complete the Medicare Part B CMS 855B. So
the funny part is there's no requirement that you call yourself a pharmacy. There's no need for that. So I can call it whatever I want to. There's no business requirement to do that. However, if you're a pharmacy, recognize you're a pharmacy. And what you're doing then is being a pharmacy, you you can actually have reassignment of Medicare benefits. So you can actually do the billing yourself. You might see this as a type of way, for example, get into telemedicine. If you're doing it for the purposes of fraud, that might come back to bite you. But if you're doing it because that's completely legitimate, that might be okay. But recognize how you're doing it, recognize the exposure, and that becomes problematic.
Now, Darshan, do you think the reason why they're stating not to mention the pharmacy name, that maybe reimbursements are higher or something? I'm not sure.
See, that's what I'm saying. We didn't have too many details, and I think it's going to be situation specific each time. It may be possible that it's completely legitimate, and they're doing it because that's just how they do it. And instead of calling it Bob's Pharmacy, they're seeing it as a larger service system that they're going to offer. So they just say, I'm Bob's Services. Sure, that's fine. But the moment you're doing it, going wink, wink, nod, nod, I don't want people to know. And that shows up in how you do your billing and the types of services you offer. For example, if this becomes a way of becoming a opioid dispensing system, that's going to come back to bite you. So that's kind of some of the stuff I was talking about. Here's another one. Waiving of copays and deductibles. That's usually problematic.
Yeah, it does happen more than I think people know about. So just a way to retain business, and it's good that you covered this.
Exactly. This is another one that's going to become more and more problematic, which is incorrect reporting of diagnosis of procedures. Now, remember, with the Dobbs decision, what you're looking at are people who may be getting the service of, for example, getting mifepristone or something like that for abortive rights. And then you may report it as something else, because it can be like mifepristone may be slightly more difficult, but it does have alternative uses. But tamoxifen and the like do have alternative uses. We didn't mention this early on, but I'm a lawyer, but I'm also a pharmacist. I have 20 years of experience working as a pharmacist. So that's one of my skill sets. But that's why I know things like a product can have multiple uses, on-label uses, off-label uses. And if you are incorrectly reporting why you're dispensing the product, not only could you get in trouble with the DOJ, but now you've got the states that may go after you as well. And in this case, you might be looking at some serious ramifications because you could be looking at alleged, and again, allegations could include things like, is that murder? is that criminal liability. Then there's overutilization of services. Again, I've been in situations where pharmacists will take prescription pads and have only the one drug that they know. And you and I were discussing this recently, Josh, where
Yes.
pharmacists will come in and they'll go, "Oh, can I get a list of the drugs with the most margin on them?" And then you start going to doctors and saying, "Here are drugs with the most margins. I want you to prescribe those." And what you might do to force that issue or push that issue might be creating script pads with pre-printed drugs on them and then dispensing them out. And all you tell the doctor is, "Oh, just check off the one you want and send it to me and I'll fill it." Well, I know you think you're making it easy, but that goes into overutilization of services, and that might be problematic. Corruption, I mentioned this a few minutes ago, this idea of providing kickbacks. So Dr. Smith, if you prescribe this, what I might do, if you prescribe enough of this product and you send the prescriptions to me, you know what? I'm going to send your wife to Barbados. You send you and your wife to Barbados. Well, that's a kickback, and that can come back to bite you. And then there's the false and unnecessary issuance of prescription drugs, which is sort of includes all this other stuff we talked about as well. So these are just the top 10 issues, and there are many, many issues that we haven't even gotten into. So is that helpful, Josh, to sort of give some context?
Yeah, I mean, that also answered a question that we got about, like, what owners are, what gray areas are owners operating in, and I think that touched upon that. So that's great. So what about something like what PBM issues or matters are you seeing out there? I know it's always a big hot topic amongst independent owners, with clawbacks, the DRI fees and stuff. But anything out that you're seeing that might be important to cover?
Well, I think there are a couple of different things I'm seeing. So, for example, I think the DIR fees and the clawbacks are constantly in the news. I mean, I don't know if people know this or this is just something I keep monitoring, but the FTC is looking at PBMs right now, especially to evaluate whether. So, FTC, for those people who don't know, is the Federal Trade Commission, and what they're often looking at are things like antitrust issues or overuse and abuse of power kind of issues. So they're looking into that issue right now, and they're evaluating whether PBMs are appropriately managing drug costs, for example. And that's come back to, because pharmacies are complaining about this issue, but also payers are complaining. For example, there was a situation a few years ago, I want to say a few years ago, but I feel like between COVID and just my memory, it could have been last week, it could have been 3 years ago. There's no way to tell. But one of the big issues you were facing in the PBM world was PBMs didn't want you to tell patients, for example, if it would be cheaper for the drug to be given out in cash. Well, that's going to be hugely problematic for the patient. So you're seeing pharmacies balk at that issue of this idea that I have to overcharge my patient, so the PBM, and it would be contractually written in, and that would be problematic. Then you've got your DIR fees, which obviously comes in after the fact. You don't even know what happened. The fees get kicked in, and that causes all kinds of issues. The other issue is sort of the fraud issues I was talking about a little bit ago, which is you're seeing PBMs, and I can't speak to collusion. I know that there are a lot of these allegations that PBMs all talk to each other and share all the information. I have no idea if that's true. I'm not going to go and make an allegation that it's true. However, it's important to recognize that these PBMs are in situations where fraud is a major concern for them. So you might be dealing with a PSAO who has contracts with a bunch of different PBMs, or you may be directly dealing with the PBM itself, but you don't want to be in a scenario, if you can help it, where a PBM refuses to start dealing with you. Because if they do that, there are these downstream ramifications where the PSAOs won't deal with you anymore. And once the PSAO finds out, they could tell the other PBMs, and that causes your entire third-party payer system to break down. So that's an example of the types of issues I'm facing. And again, recognize that this is happening from just simply them doing drug utilization reviews. That could happen from a patient complaining. That could happen from a employee of yours, an ex-employee of yours leaving and being upset. That could happen from physicians complaining that I asked for drug X to be given, and the patient says, I've never asked for drug X, and now how do we prove that? So you need to have really clean records, and you need to demonstrate that that A, you received a prescription, B, you dispensed the same prescription, and that there was nothing in the middle that could have allegations of fraud associated with it.
One question's just been always on my mind. The issues. I mean, PBM started off for a good reason. They've seemed to, I guess, put it politically correct is because I don't even know if there's a way to put it.
They started out for cost containment,
but greedy. So, I mean, how come it's taken them so? How come it's taken so long for the FTC to finally, get into this? It's not like they weren't aware before. It's not like associations like the NCPA and Pharmacists United for Truth and Transparency haven't brought this matter up. And hundreds, if not thousands, of independent pharmacy owners have complained. State senators involved. Why is it taking this long to do anything or investigate this matter?
I'm not sure I have a real answer to that question, but I think it's similar to the issue of speeding. When a cop sees a bunch of cars speeding, the cop doesn't catch every single car that's speeding. He or she will stop one of those cars. That doesn't mean that the rest of them were doing okay. It just means that they only had the manpower to catch that one person who was speeding. And then over time, more and more of them will be caught. The issue you have is similar to that. Remember that it's not a simple issue of, oh, we saw you doing something wrong, we want to go after you. And we're going to close this case in 3 months and everyone's going to be happy. This is one of those scenarios that could take years to sort of go after. And I recognize that for pharmacy, this is a huge issue, but recognize that there are 50 other topics that FTC is probably looking at. Securities law, they look at all these other things. So while it's really, really important to us as an industry, PBMs are just another issue that FTC has to deal with. So your point's well made, which is everyone should have known about it, known of the issues that people perceive. But there's a limit to what even the FTC can go after.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Of course.
Now, Darshan, what about HIPAA issues? Anything out there you're seeing that are affecting pharmacy owners? Anything that they should maybe be on the lookout that may be concerned, and how they can maybe protect themselves and standards of practices and all that stuff?
It's interesting. One of the big issues you're seeing with HIPAA is, and I don't know how to put this nicely, but the rise of social media, I think, is a really big problem in the age of HIPAA. Everyone wants to be an influencer, and I'm not sort of exempt from it. I love the idea of people hanging on to my words, but the truth is that when you are acting as a healthcare practitioner, there's a special responsibility you have, and that special responsibility is to your patients to maintain their privacy. And what you're seeing are people who are showing, oh, look at this this picture that I took of my patient's medication. Isn't it funny? And you're often pointing out something completely irrelevant, like you might be talking about, I'm making this up. You might be talking about a supplement like a horny goat weed being given with, say, it's a Viagra prescription, and it's fun to point out, oh, look at how funny this is. Or you might be talking about the SIG that's on the prescription label and talking about, oh, how silly the doctor looks putting on this type of ridiculous SIG, and you'll see something ridiculous like take 16 pills in this one day. And you know that's and again, it can happen for like a Medrol dose pack or the like. But generally speaking, that's a highly unusual prescription to have. But those, when you're not redacting the patient's information, or for example, you might even have someone who thinks they're smart and they've redacted the patient's prescription but left the phone number and the date of birth and maybe even the address, and you're going, that's still a HIPAA violation. So those are the types of issues you're seeing. What you really need to have in those cases, and you and I have briefly talked about this offline, Josh, is you need to have a quality program in place. And a quality program consists of 4 parts. It's also called the Deming cycle. And the 4 parts are: you need to plan, check, plan, do, check, act. So plan, do, check, and act. So plan is what? Plan is you need to know where you are. You need to know where you want to be. And you do what's called a gap analysis. So here's where I am. Here's where I want to be. What's the gap? What do I need to do to fix those 2 things? So that's number 1. Number 2, you need to then create those SOPs as a result of the gap analysis. So that's number 2. Number 3, you need to train on those SOPs you've created. That's still all in the planning stage. So you've now planned in terms of identifying the issue. You've also planned in terms of putting in the right pieces that you think you need. You've now trained on those right pieces. Then you actually let people now act based on the planning you've done. Here's where people tend to make a lot of mistakes. And you see this a lot in the marketing world, Josh, because you're a marketing guru, which is, and again, I'm guilty of this in the marketing world, which is I will routinely run ads, or I will do all of my my website development, and then I will never check how well I did, because I must have done it right. It seems like it's done right, and no one's looking at the analytics. No one's going back and saying, did it work? No one's looking back at your SOPs and saying, did my SOPs result in a better process? And I can tell you without a doubt, just the same way that as in marketing, there will be something that needs to be tweaked, because people change, because marketing is never right the first time. But that's the point. You need to be going back. So plan, you do the work, then you check as to what happened, and then you act, which is you go back and fix the gaps that you've created. And it's a continuous quality improvement cycle. Because what a lot of pharmacists expect is, oh, as long as I buy like a packet of SOPs, I'm good, because now I can point to policies. Well, did you ever read those policies? Like, I know pharmacists who literally, if a state board rep comes in, they'll literally rip open plastic and be like, here are my policies. Well, that's not a policy. That's just a book you got. So that's an example of having a quality program in place. And you can have, as part of that quality program, several things. You could have, how do you deal with fraud? How do you deal with copays? How do you deal with advertising? How do you deal with HIPAA noncompliance? All of those would be part of that process.
So what are some of the, like, one of the questions for like a HIPAA complaint was regarding like a pharmacy tech making fun of a patient that had an STD. She lost her temper. Now, what's the difference between like a willful act or somebody mistakenly dropping maybe the patient's data in the wrong trash can and somehow that gets fined? I know, just speaking, being in insurance for over 2 decades now, there's like professional liability will exclude some intentional acts or willful acts. So I don't know what would be, like, if you see any difference in that versus somebody doing it an intentional violation versus just a simple mistake, out of neglect.
So 2 major pieces to that. Multiple major pieces to that. So one is intentional by whom. So in that specific instance, if you set it up where you've done the right if you as a pharmacy owner set it up where you have the right trash can, and someone just made a mistake putting it into the wrong trash bin once, and that's the only time you see it, you retrain them, you explain to them why that's a bad idea, you fix the problem. They keep doing it over and over again. Either you need to talk to them, or you need to have a fix-it policy where you need to fire them. You need to demonstrate that you have that control in place. So that would be number one. Number two, so one is at the pharmacy level. And again, the impact on that can be, as you pointed out, the liability insurance may say, we don't cover intentional acts. This is not a negligence issue. This is a recklessness or willful issue. And again, those have its own ramifications. The other issue you could be looking at is as a pharmacist yourself. And then you have professional liability insurances, professional liability issues that kick in. And in those specific instances, again, you have the same exact situation, which is how do I set it up so that I am behaving in a compliant way? So yes, I can. It seems like I can show that I have funny patients and get some clout on Twitter today or on TikTok or Instagram or whatever it is that I want to show clout on. But you're showing your patients information, and that's going to come back to bite you. And again, it goes back to that issue of, are you trained? Do you understand whether you're doing this as a errand thing, or can I go back into your TikTok, find 50 of those? Like, it's one thing if, you know what, oh crap, I did a TikTok dance and there happened to be a patient standing at the window. Not good, but at least it's a one-off and I made a mistake, and you delete the video, deal with the ramifications. On the other hand, you've done 50 of those videos, it's a very different discussion at that point. And if you have, especially if you have prescriptions lined up, you can see some of the names on them, you can see the SIGs on them, that becomes a whole issue. So those are some of the HIPAA issues that pop up, and HIPAA compliance, HIPAA certification can be a long, arduous process. People tend to think about things like, I just need to be HIPAA compliant, and that takes about 15 minutes and 2 policies, and we're good. I just did a HIPAA certification for a brand new facility. I did this probably about a year ago. It was brand new. Like, we started from scratch. It was that program that we had to develop was we were trying to get high trust certified. So we had third-party auditors come in and all that good stuff. There's no requirement for any of that, but it speaks to having a compliant program in place. But in those scenarios, that program was a year long. We had a third-party evaluator. We had a third party helping us, and the whole thing landed up costing well over $150,000. Is that the only way to do it? No, but recognize that the more you take away from that, the more you're taking away from your compliance, and then you have to demonstrate that you've met all these other requirements, and you're taking on a lot of that risk. So be aware of that as you continue.
Yeah, it's being preventative. So I think that's very important nowadays. So like on one of the scenarios, if a pharmacy staff member does violate, the HIPAA compliance, and the owner is fined, can the owner go after the person who, committed that act? Maybe it's getting rid of that person, because if their insurance is not going to cover that, maybe their insurance is going to cover the defense cost, but the fine amount, that's going to be solely on them. So it comes down to, number one, so you firing the person if appropriate. And again, I'm not saying firing is the only way to solve these things. There are different ways to solve these issues. If it's a one-time thing, maybe a retraining makes sense, and it may be all it requires. Because let's be honest, some people just simply don't know, and you need to have that education. Because if you've never had that, it's not like when I went to pharmacy school, they sat down and had a whole class on HIPAA with us. And HIPAA has a lot of people making mistakes. Like, you'll see pharmacists say, "Oh, this is a HIPAA violation because you're collecting my information on the internet." And you're like, "No, it's not. That's not how HIPAA works." So there are limitations. So having the right training, having the right processes are important. But your question was, I'm going to repeat the question back to you, and please feel free to correct the scenario. But the scenario was, can I fire my employee? Is that helpful if that employee has committed a HIPAA violation? Is that the question? Yes.
Okay. You can fire. Again, you have to look at whether that's appropriate, but theoretically, it might be part of a larger scheme of problems, and that might be enough. And if that's in line with your SOPs and your policies, that may very well be enough. Will that help with the insurance company? Well, that depends on the type of insurance you have. I mean, a lot of pharmacies carry the HPSO insurance policy, and I haven't looked at that specific policy right now. But generally speaking, showing that you have processes and policies and controls in place is very, very helpful to an insurance company to defend you. As a lawyer, so as a pharmacist, the question also becomes, do I have exposure do I as a pharmacy owner have exposure if my pharmacist commits a HIPAA violation. If I am the lawyer for the patient in this scenario, or the lawyer for the Office of Civil Rights, who actually oversees HIPAA issues, I would sue everyone in sight, because that's how I don't want to be in a scenario in front of a judge where I point to, for example, the pharmacy, and go, "You committed the HIPAA violation," and the pharmacy goes, "Here are 50 policies I have. Here's examples of 30 trainings I've done. Here's every time I have pointed out to the pharmacist not to do it, and as soon as I found out about this HIPAA violation, I fired them." In that specific instance, I as a lawyer don't have much of a case against the pharmacy. In which case, I have a case against the pharmacist, and I may very well choose to go against them, but I might be what's called time barred, which means that I only have a certain amount of time to bring a case. And if I spend all of that time on the pharmacy owner, who I then find out has done everything right, and I'm now time barred from going against the pharmacist, well, I'm in a heap of problems. So I will sue as many people as I can, and then just depend on them to get themselves out. So that is that responsive to the question you had?
Yes, it is, Darshan. And like one of the questions with regard to the pharmacy tech was at a big retail store, so not really an independent, and was embarrassing a patient. She didn't know that the patient had STD medication, and I guess it was just a rude comment that she was a walking STD. I don't mean to laugh at, but a walking STD. It was brought to the manager. The manager has a duty to self-report that. So if he doesn't self-report that to corporate, then he obviously would be in trouble. But I think if this something happened maybe on an independent pharmacy level where it's a closed case, I don't know the duty to report as an owner. If maybe if it was just between a couple of people and they knew each other and they can maybe resolve that issue themselves, but then there's always a chance where an employee doesn't like another employee, and then they take it that extra step, and if they don't self-report, there could be additional consequences to the pharmacy owner, the pharmacist, the manager. I think the patient too, if the patient's publicly humiliated, I would just think the patient, if they found out that their maybe their information's being shared or talked about outside of the pharmacy, that could be a potential consequence for everybody involved in that matter.
So just to be clear, again, just repeating something that's on the screen itself, it's not legal advice. So I'm not giving answers specifically for this patient or this scenario. But generally speaking, here are some of the things that go through your head. The law doesn't seem to draw a huge distinction between a one-off situation and a multiple situation. It speaks more to the willful versus the reckless. And again, I haven't looked into the HIPAA specific laws in this specific area anytime recently, but generally speaking, the way it plays itself out is you're looking at overall, do you have controls in place? If this is a scenario where someone's made a mistake and they've spoken about a HIPAA and they've committed a HIPAA violation as a one-off situation, and you sat them down and explained, this is a huge problem, do not do this. Is that enough? From a legal perspective, probably not. But from a business perspective, you might make a different decision. Legal is not the only stakeholder in this situation. But yeah, I recognize that from a legal perspective, that may not be considered to be enough. On the other hand, that same pharmacist all day, every day is like dishing on patients and talking about how these patients are this or that. That would be hugely problematic. That is not a pharmacy I want to go to. That is not a pharmacy I want to send my parents to. If that's true, would you? And if you wouldn't, then maybe the pharmacy needs to recognize that it's not just impacting the pharmacists themselves, but it's impacting the pharmacy as a whole, and that's impacting the amount of business you're getting in. Because if you become that gossip pharmacy, remember, every time every time someone's really nice to me, I appreciate that. And every time someone's really mean to someone else, I remember that could very well be me at some other point. So in the same way, today you're gossiping on someone. For all I know, you gossip about me to someone else, and that I find that to be upsetting.
Yes, yeah, they do it. Yeah, they're willing to do it about somebody else. They're certainly willing to do that to you. There's another question. I'm not sure if this kind of falls in your scope, but I wanted to ask this to you. It's comes from a pharmacist. She's at the early stages of building her business, and she's kind of finally seen the vision that she will be doing. There's going to be multiple arms, but it looks like she wants to build a business with employee equity and sustainability in mind. Kind of like probably more information about an employee-owned or a co-op work at a corporate scale inside of healthcare and possibly out. So I'm not sure if you would have any information on that one.
Sure. So again, it's not specifically a type of work I get into, and a huge component of that is going to be who owns what part of it. So, for example, as you know, there are states where corporations cannot own pharmacies. I think it's either North or South Dakota, if I remember correctly. In those specific situations, I think the requirement, again, I have to go back and look, is that only pharmacists can own pharmacies. If that's true, you'd have to look in to see, can non-pharmacists own the pharmacy as well? So is it a technician? Is it a cashier? I love the concept of saying, I want to give my employees stakes in the company. But at what point is that, to what extent is that allowed, will often be dependent on state law. The other piece you have to be looking at is to what extent. So, for example, if one of the people you want to be part of this process are physicians, you now need to start thinking about things like Stark Law, because that goes into physician co-ownership. Is that physician going to be sending medications your way? Are you primarily filling prescriptions for that physician? All start playing into this. Overall, as a concept, do you need it to be a co-op, or can it simply just be a company, for example, that has some level of stock options? And again, I'm not saying that that's appropriate or applicable or anything of that stuff. It depends from pharmacy to pharmacy. And then you'd bring in lawyers who are who can set up stock option plans and the like, and give equity. And for example, you'll see similar versions of that in a lot of these larger health tech companies who are pharmacies, for example. And I'm not going to name them, but these large health tech companies who are pharmacists have stock options, and they have employee equity plans in there. So there are ways to structure it. But to what extent will be dependent on the pharmacy, will be dependent on the goals, will be dependent on the state, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I agree. I mean, I think I've even thought about it, having like equity, a vested period of like 5 years. It's just a way to retain good people and reward them on their performance. So, thank you for answering that. I know it definitely takes a lot more. You need to probably involve some attorneys that are in that area that can probably help.
Yeah.
Cool. I mean, I don't really have any other questions, but what advice would you like to give our group members on any preventative advice that they should, take? Anything that you think that I maybe have an answer that would be important to pharmacists and also pharmacy owners?
I think the overall goal, to me, is, first of all, you need to decide why you're in the practice of pharmacy. And I'll tell you different answers I've gotten. One is, I went to pharmacy school and I didn't want to go work in a hospital. I didn't want to work for someone else. So I decided to open up my own pharmacy. Great, no problem. So is this a lifestyle business? Is this something you go to because you need someplace to disappear from the house for X amount of time? That might be one answer. Another answer might be, I'm trying to build the next unicorn, and I'm going to be the next pill pack. Great, that's a different answer. I'm going to, I want to improve patient lives. That's a third answer. And the point is, these answers may seem like they're the same answer, but they're you need to have intentionality. And if you don't have that intentionality, you're going to get different results. The person who's going in there because they just want to get out of the house does not sound properly motivated to go make a huge profit in their business. And I'm not saying that's something you need to have. I'm just saying that that's a very different person than someone who's saying, I'm trying to build a unicorn. If you're trying to build a unicorn, are there limits to what you won't do? Because again, chasing for the purposes of having a profit is where you start having exposure to lack of quality processes. And that can come back to burn you. That can come back to bite you in your valuations. So have your quality processes completely cleaned. And I'm not just talking quality processes around compliance and pharmacy, but even your financials. You need to have a really good financial planner to help you with that process. Have a good accountant, for example. Have a good CFO. If you are trying to work on having the right, and I just did a video recently on standardization of your policies, and I had that with JO, and I'll be happy to provide a link to that from Stack, and it was great. We did 12 different ways to standardize your pharmacy. They were great. They speak to exactly this goal. Aim to standardize your pharmacy. One of the things, Josh, as you know, is I actually have a tool out there called Talos. And what I'm doing with that is I'm trying to keep your costs low, but you need to have contracts in place with all these different employees, contractors. Every time you're talking to, if you're trying to build that next unicorn, you need to have a confidentiality agreement. All these things need to be in place. So ways for you to build that and ways for you to grow that becomes really, really important. So again, I put all of that under quality processes. And again, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So that's one. Another piece I would say is you need to have the right marketing team to do this right. The word right marketing team doesn't mean brings you the most money. It means brings you the most money in the most compliant way. And those two things are very different pieces. You can't go into the pharmacy business going, I am being targeted. And you possibly are. You possibly may be dealing from a stacked deck. And that it may feel like that, especially as an independent pharmacy owner. But you need to deal with the cards you're dealt. And the answer cannot be, I will fraudulently deal with it. It has to be, how will I deal with this situation in a way that benefits my my patients and my pharmacy. And again, if you have questions about any of those, just feel free to reach out.
Great, thank you. Yeah, patient before profit, so it's always important to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Anything else, Josh, before we call it?
You've been great, very informative discussion, and I know our members are going to get a lot about from this video, and make sure we go ahead and share that. You have your information up there, but maybe just let everybody know how they can maybe contact you and what service that you offer, and how they can maybe work with you if they need to.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So my name is Darshan Kulkarni, as you can see on the screen. I'm the principal attorney of the Kulkarni Law Firm, as you can see on the screen. You can find me via the phone at 302-252-6959. Or you can even dial me on my personal cell phone at 215-813-8769. You could also just go to my website, kulkarnilawfirm.com, or email me at darshan@kulkarnilawfirm.com. That's and again, you can see Kulkarni Law Firm right up there about how to spell it. That's KULKARNI lawfirm.com. Hope that helps. And Josh, I know we're probably hopefully going to do a few more of these so people can ask more questions and we'll be able to add more value to the group.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it again, Darshan. Thank you.
Thank you.